The dog interrupts the funeral by starting to bark at the casket. When a man questions the reason, the priest becomes nervous, and then this man discovers a shocking secret. It was a cloudy day, and the sky seemed as sorrowful as everyone present at Hannah's funeral, who were in complete silence. Some people held handkerchiefs, while others, with tear-filled eyes, remembered every happy moment shared with her. The wind blew softly, rustling the leaves of the trees, as if nature itself was paying its final tribute. Suddenly, an unexpected sound broke the silence. Duke, Hannah's loyal golden retriever, had somehow escaped from Mrs. Patterson's house where he'd been staying since Hannah's death 3 days ago. He burst through the church doors, his fur matted and eyes wild with determination. Duke wasn't just any dog. He had been Hannah's constant companion for 8 years, and locals often joked that he understood human speech better than most people. Now he stood before the ornate mahogany casket, his powerful bark echoing through the vaulted ceiling. People looked at each other, surprised and uneasy. "How did he get out?" whispered Mrs. Chen to her neighbor. Margaret said she locked all the doors. But Duke's behavior was unlike anything they'd seen before. His hackles were raised, and he paced back and forth in front of the casket with an almost human-like urgency. The children pressed closer to their parents, remembering the old stories about animals that could sense supernatural presences. Father Michael, standing near the altar in his ceremonial robes, noticed all eyes turning toward him. He cleared his throat and forced a smile. "Please, everyone, let's not allow this disruption to—" But his words were cut short as Duke suddenly stopped barking and began sniffing the air around the casket with intense concentration. The dog's ears perked up, and he let out a low whine that sent chills through the congregation. "Something's wrong," muttered old Tom Bradley, a retired police officer who'd moved to the village 5 years ago. "I've never seen Duke act like this." Father Michael's face flushed red. "It's just grief," he said quickly, wiping perspiration from his brow despite the cool autumn air. "Animals don't understand death the way we do." But even as he spoke, his hands trembled slightly as he clutched his prayer book. Among the mourners sat David Martinez, a forensic accountant who'd recently inherited his aunt's cottage on Elm Street. He'd only met Hannah twice at the local market, but something about her gentle nature had struck him. David had a natural instinct for detecting deception. It was what made him excellent at his job uncovering financial fraud. Now, watching Father Michael's nervous gestures and Duke's agitated behavior, every instinct screamed that something was terribly wrong. Duke suddenly abandoned the casket and trotted directly to David, looking up at him with intelligent brown eyes that seemed to plead for help. The dog nudged David's hand with his wet nose, then returned to the casket, repeating this pattern 3 times. "Interesting," David murmured, rising from his pew. The movement caught everyone's attention. "Father Michael, I have to ask, was Hannah's body examined by the county coroner?" The priest's eyes darted nervously around the room. "Of course not. She died peacefully in her sleep. Natural causes. I found her myself when she didn't come to morning service." "But the law requires—" "The law?" Father Michael's voice rose an octave. "I've been serving this community for 15 years. Hannah was like a daughter to me. Are you suggesting I would lie about her death?" David noticed several interesting details. A fresh scratch on the priest's left hand, barely visible beneath his sleeve, the faint smell of bleach emanating from the man's cassock, and most telling of all, the way Father Michael avoided looking directly at the casket. Duke had now positioned himself between David and the casket, as if forming an alliance. The dog's behavior reminded David of the cadaver dogs he'd observed during a fraud investigation involving insurance claims. They displayed the same focused intensity when they detected something others couldn't perceive. "Father," David said calmly, "I noticed Hannah's obituary mentioned she was involved in the church's financial committee. Was she working on anything specific before her death?" The color drained from Father Michael's face. She helped with bookkeeping. Nothing important." His voice cracked on the last words. Mrs. Patterson, Duke's temporary guardian, suddenly spoke up. "That's strange, Father. Just last week, Hannah called me upset about some discrepancies she'd found in the church accounts. She said she needed to speak with someone outside the parish about it. A murmur rippled through the congregation. Father Michael's jaw tightened. Mrs. Patterson, grief can distort memories. Hannah never mentioned any concerns to me. But David was already connecting the dots. In his experience, financial irregularities often led to desperate measures. What exactly did Hannah discover? He asked Mrs. Patterson. She wouldn't give me details, but she mentioned large withdrawals that didn't match the documented expenses. She was planning to drive to the county seat to meet with someone at the diocese office. Father Michael stepped forward aggressively. This is completely inappropriate. We're here to honor Hannah's memory, not spread malicious gossip. His hands were shaking visibly now. Duke suddenly ran to the side door of the church and began scratching at it desperately. David followed, with several curious parishioners trailing behind. The door led to the church's administrative office, a small room filled with filing cabinets and an old computer. Duke seems to want to show us something, David observed. Father Michael, would you mind if we took a look? Absolutely not. That office contains confidential parish information. I demand that you leave this property immediately. But Tom Bradley, the retired police officer, had moved to block the church's main exit. Actually, Father, I think we should hear what David has to say. In my 30 years on the force, I learned to trust unusual behavior patterns. David knelt beside Duke, who was still pawing at the office door. What is it, boy? What did Hannah find? As if understanding, Duke ran to a large potted plant near the office entrance and began digging frantically in the soil. Stop him! Father Michael lunged forward, but Tom Bradley caught his arm. Let the dog dig, Tom said firmly. Within moments, Duke had unearthed a small, waterproof pouch. David carefully opened it, revealing a USB drive and a handwritten note. Hannah's distinctive script read, If something happens to me, this contains proof of what Father Michael has been doing. The money isn't going where he claims. There's another account, and I found evidence of payments to someone named Victor Kozlov. The congregation gasped. Father Michael made a desperate grab for the note, but David held it out of reach. Victor Kozlov, David said thoughtfully. That name appeared in a case I worked on last year. He's connected to a human trafficking ring that was shut down in the next county. Father Michael's face went ashen. You don't understand. They threatened to kill me if I didn't cooperate. Hannah discovered the payments and she wouldn't listen to reason. She was going to destroy everything. So you killed her, David stated calmly. It was an accident. Father Michael broke down completely. I went to her house to explain, to beg her not to report it. She threatened to call the police immediately. We struggled over her phone, and she fell down the stairs. I panicked. I couldn't let anyone discover what I'd been forced to do. Duke began barking again, but this time it was different. Sharper, more urgent. He ran toward the back of the church, toward the storage area behind the altar. Tom Bradley was already on his phone with the county sheriff's office, but David followed Duke. In the storage room, behind stacks of hymn books and Christmas decorations, Duke had found something else. A small refrigeration unit, the kind used for storing flowers. But when David opened it, his blood ran cold. Hannah's body was inside, carefully preserved. The casket they'd been preparing to bury contained only weights and padding. My God, whispered Mrs. Patterson, who had followed them. He was going to bury an empty casket. Father Michael collapsed onto a pew, his confession pouring out in broken sobs. The trafficking ring needed someone to help move people through the county. They chose me because of my position in the community. I never wanted to hurt anyone, but they said they'd kill me if I refused. When Hannah found the financial records, I knew it was over. David pieced together the rest of the story as they waited for the authorities. Father Michael had been using church funds to pay bribes and transportation costs for human traffickers. Hannah, with her keen eye for numbers, had noticed discrepancies in the church's accounts. When she threatened to expose him, he'd killed her in a moment of panic, then used his position to avoid an official investigation of her death. Duke had known something was wrong from the moment he'd escaped Mrs. Patterson's house. His incredible sense of smell had detected the scent of death around the casket, or rather, the absence of it. He'd also recognized something familiar about Father Michael's scent, something that reminded him of that terrible night when his beloved Hannah had died. As the sheriff's deputies led Father Michael away in handcuffs, the full scope of his crimes began to emerge. The USB drive contained evidence of multiple financial transactions, forged documents, and communications with the trafficking ring. Hannah had been meticulously documenting everything, building a case that would have exposed not just the embezzlement, but the entire human trafficking operation. The county coroner later confirmed that Hannah had died from a severe head injury consistent with a fall, but the angle of the wound suggested she'd been pushed rather than simply fallen. Father Michael's fingerprints were found on her phone, and security camera footage from a neighboring house showed him leaving Hannah's property late on the night she died. Duke became something of a local hero, but he seemed to understand the gravity of what had been uncovered. For weeks after the arrest, he would sit quietly by Hannah's actual gravesite, as if keeping vigil. Mrs. Patterson officially adopted him, and he slowly began to return to his normal, playful self. David decided to stay in the village permanently. His skills as a forensic accountant proved invaluable in untangling the web of financial crimes Father Michael had committed over the years. The church had lost nearly $200,000 to the trafficking ring, money that should have gone to community programs and charitable works. The human trafficking investigation led to the arrest of 12 additional suspects across 3 counties. Victims who had been exploited by the ring were finally able to get help and begin rebuilding their lives. Hannah's courage in documenting the crimes had ultimately saved dozens of people from continued exploitation. On the first anniversary of Hannah's death, the village held a memorial service at the newly renovated church. A small plaque near the entrance honored her memory and her commitment to justice. Duke attended the service, calm and dignified, wearing a small medal that the county sheriff had specially made for him. As David stood with the other mourners, he reflected on the chain of events that had brought the truth to light. It had started with a dog's instinct and ended with justice for both Hannah and the victims of human trafficking. Sometimes, he realized, the most unexpected heroes emerge in the darkest moments. The new priest, Father Rodriguez, concluded the memorial service with words that would be remembered long after. Hannah's legacy reminds us that truth has a way of surfacing, no matter how deeply it's buried. And sometimes, that truth comes through the most unexpected messengers. Duke wagged his tail once, as if in agreement, then settled peacefully beside David's feet. His job was finally done.